Hello, and welcome to the Deepbluerenegade podcast. My name is Molly, also known as the Deepbluerenegade, and I'd like to welcome you guys to episode 302. Today is Monday, January 20th, 2020, and I'm glad you could join me today. I think I got a better podcasting spot. It involves very gingerly picking things up and moving them, so hopefully it won't be too crazy. I don't think I have any power lines in view, so that's not too crazy as well. We have like cactus and flowers, so I figured that was going to be, and bamboo. Cactus, bamboo. So, I don't know. We'll figure out how we go. I was contemplating setting up the lights, but it's like lunchtime, so we're just gonna go with it. So, I have the day off today. It is Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So, I don't know what it'd be. So, I've been hanging out and having a weekend on Monday. Excuse me. So, the reason why I didn't podcast this weekend was actually I was taking part in 2 Clemis and Clemis workshops that are happening in Richmond, California. So in the morning, it is 25 minutes away, and in the evening, it is somewhere between 25 minutes and 60 minutes away, depending on traffic. So it was pretty easy to go back and forth. So I just driving out every day. They ended up offering it at discounted prices because both workshops were the first time they were offering the class, so they figured there was probably some bugs that they were going to be working out. And, what would it be? And it was the first time that they were actually having local workshops, so I figured it would make sense to come out, learn some stuff, meet some people, and so I think in that regard I've been fairly successful, which is cool. So, what would it be? On the knitting front, I still have my single project that will soak up all available knitting, and that is my V-neck boxy by Pupilo Catelli that I am knitting out of 2 yarns held double. One of them is Shibui Knits. Pebble in the blue crate colorway, and the other one is Shibui Knits Silk Cloud in the Abyss colorway. So not too crazy. So after podcasting last week, the Dear Sit Everyone and I ended up going to see the Star Wars movie. So we were able to use our car and go to a place where movies were less expensive than San Francisco. So this is how it is coming together so far. The contrast isn't quite showing up right between the gray and the black here, but not too crazy. It seems like it's getting pretty close to the right length in the front. So I may be starting the high-low hem fairly soon. I haven't had a chance to sit down and measure to see whether or not I'm at my target length yet. So the pattern has you knit a certain distance past the underarms. And then begin ribbing, so it's more of a crop length, and what I want to do is to have more length in the back. So, because I want to wear this type of sweater with like leggings, so that just makes sense for my lifestyle. I'm not a crop sweater person. So, I feel like I'm getting close, but we shall see. It does soak up all available knitting. I'm getting a little concerned now whether or not I'm going to have enough black, so I'm almost done with one of my skeins, and I have one that I've partially used for like the sleeves and the collar. So we shall see, because I have at this point like 2.5-ish balls of yarn, balls of the pebble, which is a 25-gram light fingering weight thing, and then the silk cloud is much more on the lace weight end of this, or cobweb end of the spectrum, so that's like a 400 yard sort of thing. It should, per 25 grams, so it's just bonkers. I don't have the labels. The labels are sealed away somewhere, which makes it challenging to find. So it's been taking up a lot of knitting, and I'm sort of in the case where it's like, what am I going to do next? But I still do have quite a bit more to go. It's going to be so nice to wear. I've definitely found myself cold a decent amount, so even though it shall be cool, and it shall be it's winter, so it's cool. It's not cold. Like, I'm outside in a t-shirt. It's like a little bit too cold, but the knitting helps a lot. So I am glad that I'm in a place where it is easy to wear knitting. So this has received most of the love. It's been a carry-around project, but it is awkwardly large at this point. So we shall see how everything comes together. Right before I started to record the podcast, I was like, oh, there looks to be some weird things happening with the tarp. And now, like, this entire porch is, like, soaked with water, because we poked the tarp to release the water from the poorly constructed outside space. So, whatever. So, on the spinning front, I did end up working on my spindle project this week, but I did get a pretty good burn on my Jenny the Fleece project. So this is my 3-color gradient yarn that I was making with my the fleece. So what I have here is a delightful bowl of yarn. So these are the 4 skeins that I've completed so far. And the one that I ended up finishing this week is this one. So this is the blue teal skein, which we can contrast with its neighbor in the color sequence, which is teal blue. And maybe these even look different. So here is teal blue, here's blue teal. So it's gonna be pretty subtle, or would it be? So you have all of these different jewel tones, and we go from there. And then I have the sister skeins, which hopefully maybe show up slightly better than they usually do, because I am out in the world. I have my purple teal and my teal purple here. I don't know, I'm not sure that that's actually coming through right, but oh well. It's just a project of awkwardness. So, as this is sort of going through, what I'm working on right now is actually the solid colored teal skein. I thought I had pulled out my bag of leftovers, but I didn't grab it before coming outside. So, the one that sits in the middle here is the one that is just teal plies, and that one will be an interesting one to add, and then I will have all of the teal completed. So I finished a bobbin last night of just all teal, and then what I have on my wheel at the moment is another bobbin of teal, because all of the bobbins are going to be the same this time. And then what I'm going to end up doing when I'm plying is I will incorporate my leftover singles in as I go. So they'll be a little bit better rested, but it's not like it's the end of the world. And here is some of that teal fiber. So this is fiber that came from the darkest shades of the Jenny the Fleece, which is a Shetland cross BFL cross Corriedale, I believe. So mostly Shetland with some BFL and Corriedale. 50% Shetland, 25% BFL, 20% Corriedale, I believe. And I've really, it is very lovely colored stuff. I had made the balls of top, was dissatisfied with their colors, ended up dyeing it some more, got this lovely teal color, because making it more blue is always a winner in my book. And combined it all on the hackle, which ended up opening it up a decent amount. I've definitely had some chunks that were inadequately opened up again after the dyeing process. I wouldn't recommend the Wodabe. Definitely prefer dyeing locks over dyeing top. Part of this has to do with how to keep the fiber nice after dyeing. And I did not have the ability to just spin the water out. So, as you do. So if I had like a top loading washer that could only spin, that could make things a lot easier for many different pieces, but for now, it's fine. So the rest of the episode is just going to be a little bit of show and tell with what I ended up doing with at the Drum Carter workshops. So Henry and Roy Clements are hilarious. It's most notable when they both agree. But it'd be the case where they generally are just throwing a lot of shade around no matter what. So, the Fractal class was probably a little longer than what their class is going to end up being for real. And so this was a color theory class. Ooh, I just gave myself a cut. That's really annoying. This is not reading. So, we ended up working on two different ways of creating repeating color patterns while working within the limitations of the Drum Carter. And I must admit that so it was a case where there were a lot of techniques about using a drum carter that were covered in the class. There were some people who were just like brand new to drum carters. And then another part of it was just sort of understanding what goes into making a fractal, with the thought process being that you can make some very nice stuff on the drum carter, and you have a bit more control over your materials, your inputs. So, what we ended up doing was we started off with a 2-color 2-ply, with the thought process being that you can arrange colors on the drum carter and then actually set up gradients, for example. Trying to figure out the best way to precariously perch everything. Where are you, End? Here you are, End. So, what we ended up doing for the first round, that was probably the first round, was set up 1/2 white, 1/2 brown, create a bat with 1 ounce of fiber on it, and then end up pulling it off after you have everything set up the way you want it, pulling it off with a disc. So I start with this all white end here. And then as we go, we end up getting more of the brown incorporated, which is a cool effect that you can create with drum cutters, and actually you can sort of see the layers of color, which was how I was putting the fiber on. And when I spin this is going to end up creating sort of an average color of the two. And then as we go across, it becomes more dominated by brown because I wasn't putting brown on that part of the drum cutter, until we get to the point where it is pure brown BFL. So this was carded sliver that they ended up having, so I think this is the case where this is from like a mill. And this is this type of fiber is often featured in their classes to show whatever technique they're trying to do. And then what we ended up doing was preparing the same type of bat, which was white on one end and brown on the other, with a little bit of overlap in between because you want things to hold together, and ended up pulling Rologs off. So this was a way of creating a fractal pattern, because you started with that same base bat, but how you remove the fiber from the pattern is you put in these smaller segments of color. So this one is probably the easiest way to implement that sort of pattern. What maybe frustrated me a little bit with, what frustrated me slightly, and I don't know if this is like my own competence at, because this was actually the first time pulling Rologs off the drum cutter. I took a class that was entirely Rologs with Roy, like last year at DFW Fiberfest, but it's a little harder to get perfect sized Rologs off, and I don't know if that's like experience. It seemed like I was fairly consistent, but there's one of my Rologs is definitely much bigger than one of my Rologs is definitely much bigger. So what I thought was cool, and maybe is actually a much more scalable technique, is what we ended up learning for the 3-ply. Now, the reason why what's going to end up happening is the class will probably be shorter, because we were given 3 bags of, we were given a bag of merino fiber that was each in 1 ounce things, and the first thing we had to do was just make bats. And I don't think that I had played with turning the dyed merino locks into bat before, so I was struggling a little bit with like what was the right amount of, the shorter the fiber, the more annoying it is to work on the drum cutter. Now that isn't to say the drum cutter is still the best way to do it, but so I made a white bat, a blue bat, and a yellow bat. So 1 ounce bat of each, which ended up taking a pretty significant amount of time. Then ended up splitting them into 9 different pieces, 3 of each color, and then ended up repeating the process with these 1 ounce segments for what was going on with the previous 2-ply style, which was the case where we made Rologs. Here, I'll pull them out. You made a bat that you pulled off the Diz with one of these. You repeated the rollout process. Oh shit. I'll have to retrieve that soon before it melts. So, ended up making Rologs with the same process as the 2-ply, so good repetition in terms of that. And then what I think is actually the more scalable way was then weighed these thirds into 9ths, and then I made a light bat with, and pulled it off the same way as this, but with some of my little fiber. It required a different Diz in order to get it off in the right way. And made 3 of these guys. I managed to do one at the very, very end of class. Like past the time when it should have been done. because it just took me so long to get through that. And they were like, yeah, they were trying to figure out what the best way to do it was. So it's possible they need to take an ounce of fiber out and do this technique with 2 colors. But I think they wanted to show the scalability there, and that you could do it from fleece. So this started off as dyed fleece. So there are pluses and minuses. I guess it depends on how they want to prioritize. I'm really loving like the fun colors, and it's going to be a really cool project to spin. Excuse me. And I really appreciate that they thought deeply about how to implement it. So if I repeat this technique again in the future, what I would end up doing is, so they were saying that this is probably the minimum amount that you could diz off, but I think I'd like to challenge that maybe a little bit, so as you do. So I think that I have much more control on the size of my color repeat doing it this way. So this may be sort of the way I would implement Fractals from dyed fleece, for example. What would it be? And it was the case where I think it was just, I don't know, like, I know that not everyone who watches the podcast spins, but it was very surprising to me, or what was it? So I definitely did an experiment. Very gingerly. There we go. My label. So there was a time where I decided that I was going to, it was actually for a project that got Googled over this week, so I broke out my Phaedra Violante, which I took 3 braids of nest fiber, broke them into their component colors, and then ended up making 6 tonal skeins of yarn, which I then recombined by alternating into like this crazy whatever, this crazy slowly gradating stripes thing, for which we concluded that for me to sell it would be like $25,000. I don't know the market, but we figured that was the fair price. Or was it 25? Probably 25,000 actually. As you do. So I wanted to just recomb the fiber to sort of create a average tonal mix, and it, like, you know, I love nest fiber, it like disintegrated on me. And so one of the things that they were arguing about was that if you start from fleece and you wash it yourself and get the veg out, that is going to be significantly better wool, because most wool is actually treated with sulfuric acid to dissolve the veg out. And so whatever, your hay and stuff like that, and that it's actually a horrifying amount of veg that's allowed in wool. So so by doing it on your own, you can actually have much better, higher quality fleece. So it'd be the case where you can actually like break merino apart into lots of little pieces. And so what would it be? Like they were sort of grumpy about like the whole superwash process, and I would say there's a place for superwash, but obviously it isn't something I can do as like a home hobbyist sort of thing. So that sort of gets into the second thing. Which was the shave 'em to save 'em. So this is very much so a United States initiative in order to, oh, this is going to be interesting. So, the second class was one that I think ended up having like very, this one I think they're gonna give no changes to in the future, which was basically they had 16 types of fleece that represent, or 16 different fleeces that ended up representing breeds that are considered recovering rare, extremely rare in the United States. So some of these things are due to the fact that England won't let us have the sheep. They consider, or whatever, I don't know. Or in the case of one of the ones that I picked up, it was recently declared a separate breed of sheep. As you do. So they ended up talking about all the different types. I ended up getting stickers to put in a password for these Shave Them to Save Them initiative, but basically the idea being to get spinners jump started on using some different types of, or different breeds, because if there isn't a market for it, no one's going to grow it and it will disappear. So, there are some concerns about whether, like, how sustainable that is, because it might just be a one-time thing where you're like, oh, hold your nose while you deal with the churro. What was it? So I ended up picking one long wool to do during the class, and I ended up picking up sort of medium wool to do during the class. And it was the case where they had pulled samples out of every bag, so they had some super gorgeous Shetland, and it was definitely on the $10 an ounce side. And I'd concluded that since I'd done Shetland before, that probably wouldn't be in the spirit of the class, even though it was like, this was Shetland that had been bred to have, that wasn't dual coated, it was single coated, and it was super fine and amazing. It was like, oh my gosh. But as we were going through all of the samples, I ended up handing out the sample of the sheep called the Florida Cracker. So this was recently designated as a breed, which is why there don't seem to be a lot of them. From what we can tell, the shepherdess, or whatever, the people who grew that sheep, we disagree with where they say it came from, because they say it was descended from churro, and then over 500 years somehow evolved to be way nicer than it, and I don't know. It doesn't jive, because the fleece probably was more like, what would it be? It was probably more similar to merino than caracal in the grand scheme of things, basically. So, what we concluded was, after processing, that it seemed most similar to like a CBM fleece in terms of when it was done. And everyone was sort of fascinated, like everyone wanted to feel my back, because I just decided to go for it, because I found it to be interesting, because the sample was really soft, but it was also very full of hay. So there was just a giant mess of hay around me as I was trying to like get as much of it out as possible. And so in order to qualify for the thing, they were selling things in 4-ounce increments, and I managed to get through 8 ounces during the class. I thought that was pretty cool. Pretty good there. What I ended up doing was I processed half of it, and then I ended up, one of the things I wanted to do was do a dress rehearsal for what I plan to do eventually with my Romney fleece, so I wanted to work with the long wool, and then I circled back around at the end of the class to finish the other 2 ounces of this. So this is from the Florida Cracker fleece. It is super soft and dreamy. I'm very excited to work with this. I have spun with a rare breed before, so at some point I ended up buying some Hog Island sheep from Ross Farms, and that was like in a little 2-ounce bump, and it was like it was a downbreed, so it was just like so different than anything I'd ever spun previous to that. And then I eventually dyed it, and now it's sitting in my stash, locked away in Dallas somewhere in a storage unit. But I think this ends up giving at least pretty decent justice to the beauty of the bat, but also, let's show you the backside. I think you can also probably see some of the veg matter stuck in there as well. If not, trust me, there's veg in here. So this was, but I am really liking how this turned out. There are a couple like dark hairs in here, and I don't know if this is because I ended up doing the Leicester in between. So after I'd had this experience where it was like, okay, this is a medium wool, you feed it in the drum carder in a certain way, because it's on the finer side of things, you end up using a like plastic bristle brush to tamp it down. Which way actually? I think I'm gonna wind it up this way. Okay. So use a plastic brush to. It's funny, I think I just like fold it in half. So you use a plastic brush to tamp it down because it's not the most strong of those, and that ends up letting you put on as much fiber as possible, and it was a good experience to do that. Challenges, it was on the shorter side, so let's see. So it was on the shorter side, so it was a little bit harder to feed into the drum carder. And maybe you can see how filthy this is. There's just hay everywhere. It was definitely the filthiest of all of the fleeces available, so I sort of knew going in. Like, it was sort of like a trial run for seeing how that was going to work together. Alright, let's see if we can. This is maybe? Okay. May have to put this back in the sleeve later. That was slightly more challenging than expected. So, what would it be? So it was the case where I was trying to get as much vegetable matter apart. It did have very nice lock structure. I was just feeding to Ben, and it seemed like it went fairly well. It's going to be a lot of fun to spin that bat. And then to contrast, I ended up, having to just have it be overflowing on either side. So in contrast, I ended up getting this Leicester long wool. So I talked with Henry about what of the fleece they had available was going to be most similar to the Romney I wanted to process. And they had recommended, or he had recommended this one. And holy smokes, this was really, really easy to process. There is some hay in here. But what you can see on the backside of this bat is like the gorgeous wavy crimp of this wool. Basically. This is a 2-ounce bat that I ended up making with that. And I think to minimize disruption, I am going to maybe lightly fold this up in order to get it to fit back into the container. So I have like a little bit. So it was a couple different, it was many shades of gray, the fleece. So what I ended up doing to sort of manage it a little bit better was I made 2 bats, 1 pass, and then I combined, then I ended up, yes, this is going to work much better. We'll have to try this with the cracker too. So what I've done was I folded the floofy edges of the bat in, which is resulting in it staying better contained. So I ended up then combining the two bats together because I felt like their colors were all pretty different from each other. Good. Now I can wrap this bad boy up. It's a little bit easier with their tool. The tool comes with their drum carder. I did not come in with the drum carder. But this one was super gorgeous, so it made me very excited about eventually processing the Romney Fleece, what is it? It made me excited about eventually processing the Romney Fleece, just because it was like such a smooth process. So, there's just something where it's just really friendly to work with the longer rows on the drum carder, so I really didn't need too much in order to read something that was cool. So now I'm gonna try refolding this one. So, I would say, or what would it be? It was an interesting class. I really appreciated the opportunity to I really appreciated the opportunity to sort of try and play with a variety of things. That was cool. I feel like this bat ended up shrinking. This might have been a fleece where I needed to snap before before inserting. I did no such thing. But I don't think I have, like, they're probably, or one thing that I think is challenging me about the shorter fleeces is getting at the shortcuts, or avoiding having those be a problem, and that sort of thing. So, and that I struggled with that with the Merino and the Fractals glass as well. So, as you do. Alright, this sort of has a hope of, I think, fitting in the container now. Just had to change my folding technique. So, so that was good information as well. Just the process, like, the finished product is lovely. So, the finished product is lovely, but obviously, there are certainly things that I could learn to do better. What would it be? I could definitely the shorter, finer fleeces are just a little bit more challenging. So getting the shortcuts out, figuring out a efficient way of removing the stuff that shouldn't be incorporated, that sort of thing. Much easier to do with their tool. Not terrible to do outside, but I don't think I would have wanted to put a front down there. So there's just some things which I probably need more practice with, in terms of getting the shorts out, finding the best way to get as much of the vegetable matter out as possible. Some of it does come out as you're carding, but a decent amount. Going to be even just handling the fleece. So it was every time that I ended up pulling on the Florida Cracker, like, stuff just came out. And part of this, I think, is they ended up buying from this person, even though it wasn't up to their usual standards, because there probably needs to be a little bit more two-way with respect to what are hand spinners expecting in their fleece and what are they willing or not willing to deal with in the process. So, raising the sheep in such a way where they have less opportunity to get covered in hay is positive, as you do. But whatever. Overall, I think it was a positive sort of experience. So, like, I could definitely see, or would it be, depending on what's going on, like, I could definitely see a situation where it'd be cool to take that class again, just because of the sheer variety available and, like, having people around to troubleshoot what was going on. Or, approaching it from, like, whatever. So, their thought process is that, cleaning fleece is very high activation energy sort of activity, and having clean fleece available makes it easier for people to use the drum carders. So what would it be? There's always something to be sold. I do intend to get a drum carder from them, so it was good to have a chance to practice processing fleece on the drum carder to know what's going on. So shouldn't be too crazy. So don't see any reason why recording won't happen next weekend. Hopefully I have like a little bit more time to knit today. I don't know, since it's a day off after all, not too crazy. It's probably time for lunch anyways, so go from there. I don't know if this is like the going to the grocery store hungry sort of operation or not, but I don't think we're that bad. But we'll have to go grocery shopping at some point. So, with that, I hope you guys have a lovely week, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon. So, take care, guys. Bye-bye.